The Match King, Ivar Kruger. Stockholm, the 1920s. Picture the richest man in Europe. Not a king, not an oil baron, a match manufacturer. His name is Ivar Kruger, and by the mid-1920s, he controls roughly 3/4 of every match struck on planet Earth. Governments come to him, not the other way around. When France needs a loan, Kruger writes the check. When Germany needs post-war capital, Kruger is there, checkbook in hand, in exchange for match monopolies across entire nations. Bankers on Wall Street don't just trust him, they worship him. He's called the Match King, the Swedish genius, the man who could do no wrong. Here's what nobody outside his inner circle knew.
Kruger was forging Italian government bonds by hand, alone, late at night in his own apartment. He was running one of his 200 companies to quietly pay dividends to investors in another, creating the illusion of endless growth. Auditors were kept away from the real books. Even his closest partners only saw fragments of the truth. It worked brilliantly for over a decade. Then, October 1929 happened. The stock market crashed, credit dried up overnight, and a man whose entire empire depended on an endless supply of new investor cash suddenly had no new investors. By March 1932, the cracks were unmistakable. Kruger traveled to Paris, telling associates he needed rest. On the morning of March 12th, he was found not alive in his apartment. A gunshot wound, officially ruled a self-harm, though conspiracy theories about foul play persist to this day. When investigators finally cracked open the real books, the scale of the fraud stunned even seasoned Wall Street veterans. Roughly $250 million had evaporated, equivalent to well over $5 billion today. Ivar Kruger built an empire on matchsticks, and when it finally caught fire, it burned banks across 2 continents.
The Bre-X gold fraud. Now we travel to the jungles of Borneo, Indonesia, 1993. A small, struggling Canadian mining company called Bre-X Minerals stakes a claim in the remote region of Busang. Within 3 years, this penny stock, literally trading for pennies, is being called the site of the single largest gold discovery in human history. Analysts estimate the deposit at 200 million ounces of gold. For comparison, that's more gold than most entire countries hold in reserve. Investors don't just buy in, they lose their minds.
Bre-X stock rockets from under $1 to over $280 a share. Ordinary Canadians mortgage their homes to buy shares. Pension funds pile in. Mining giants like Barrick Gold and Placer Dome start a bidding war just to get a piece of the deposit. The Indonesian government gets involved. President Suharto's own family reportedly angles for a cut. Then, in March 1997, a geologist named Michael de Guzman, Bre-X's chief geologist, the man responsible for verifying the core samples, is called to meet an independent auditing team flying in to confirm the find once and for all. He never makes the meeting. Somewhere over the jungle, de Guzman falls from a helicopter. His body is found days later, badly decomposed. Officially ruled a self-harm, supposedly triggered by a diagnosis of hepatitis. Almost nobody who studied the case believed that explanation. Weeks later, the independent audit team delivers its verdict. There was no gold. Not 200 million ounces. Not meaningfully any at all. The high-grade core samples had been tampered with. Investigators believe workers had been shaving gold dust, likely taken from old jewelry, and salting it directly into drill samples by hand for years, undetected. In a single trading session, Bre-X stock went from $280 to essentially zero. Roughly $6 billion in market value vanished before lunch. To this day, nobody has ever been criminally convicted for the Bre-X fraud. Nobody knows definitively who ordered the salting to begin, and nobody knows for certain what really happened in that helicopter over the jungle.
Charles Ponzi. Every scam on this list owes something to one man. This is where the word comes from. Boston, 1920. An Italian immigrant named Charles Ponzi tells investors he's found a loophole, a way to exploit differences in international postal reply coupons between countries and legally profit off the exchange rate gaps. His promise? Turn $100 into $150 in just 90 days. A 50% return in 3 months guaranteed. It sounds insane. It also sounds just barely plausible enough.
Word spreads through Boston's Italian immigrant community first, then further. Investors line up outside his office on School Street, cash in hand. Here's the truth. Ponzi was buying almost none of these postal coupons. The scheme was paying earlier investors with money coming in from new investors and skimming a fortune off the top for himself. At his absolute peak in the summer of 1920, Ponzi is pulling in $250,000 a day. In 1920 money, that's the rough equivalent of several $1,000,000 daily today. He buys a mansion, he becomes a minor celebrity, giving interviews to reporters, dismissing skeptics. Then, the Boston Post starts investigating. A financial writer runs the actual math on international postal coupons and realizes there aren't nearly enough of them in global circulation to support Ponzi's claimed volume of trades. The scheme collapses within weeks. 6 banks fail as a direct result. An estimated 40,000 investors lose their combined life savings, somewhere around $20 million at the time.
Ponzi serves time in federal prison, is deported back to Italy, and dies decades later, broke, in a charity ward in Brazil. But his name survives every single scheme like it that comes after, a permanent word in the dictionary for the oldest trick in finance.
The Enron collapse. On paper, Enron was untouchable. By the year 2000, it's the 7th largest company in America. Fortune magazine names it America's most innovative company, 6 years running. Its stock trades north of $90 a share. Its Houston headquarters is a monument to American corporate ambition. Behind that glass tower, an entire architecture of deception. Enron's executives, led by CEO Jeffrey Skilling and Chairman Ken Lay, had built a system called mark-to-market accounting, which let them book projected future profits from long-term energy contracts as current income immediately, regardless of whether that money would ever actually arrive. When deals underperformed, instead of reporting a loss, Enron hid the debt in a web of off-the-books shell companies with names literally pulled from Star Wars, like Chuko and Jedi. CFO Andrew Fastow ran these shell entities personally, sometimes profiting twice, once for Enron and once for himself, skimming tens of millions on the side. Meanwhile, Enron employees were actively encouraged, some say pressured, to keep their 401k retirement savings loaded with Enron stock. Executives, who knew the real numbers, were quietly selling their own shares. In October 2001, the Wall Street Journal starts publishing questions about Enron's accounting. The house of cards begins to shake. 15 days later, 15 days, Enron files for what was, at the time, the largest bankruptcy in American history. $74 billion in shareholder value is wiped out. Over 20,000 employees lose their jobs in a single stroke, and many lose their entire retirement savings simultaneously because it had all been tied up in company stock they'd been told right up to the final days was safe.
Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 largest accounting firms in the world, the firm meant to audit Enron's books and catch exactly this kind of fraud, collapses entirely within months, taking 85,000 jobs worldwide down with it. Skilling is sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. Lay is convicted too, but dies of a heart attack before sentencing. Enron didn't just teach America a lesson about corporate fraud. It rewired federal law. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act,
the sweeping corporate accountability legislation still in force today exists directly because of what happened inside that Houston tower.
The 1MDB scandal. Kuala Lumpur, 2009. The Malaysian government creates a sovereign wealth fund called One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB for short. The official mission? Fund strategic economic development projects and turn Malaysia into a regional financial powerhouse. The real mission, investigators would later determine, was something else entirely. Over the following years, an estimated $4.5 billion is siphoned out of 1MDB through a Byzantine international network of shell companies, fraudulent bond issuances, and falsified transactions. Where did the money go? A $250 million super yacht, Manhattan penthouses, a private jet, tens of millions of dollars in jewelry, reportedly gifted to Hollywood actresses, a genuine Picasso painting. And, almost too strange to be real, millions of dollars funneled into financing a Hollywood blockbuster, The Wolf of Wall Street, a movie about greed and financial fraud, financed, in part, by an actual case of financial fraud. The producers involved would later face their own legal reckoning over the money's origin.
At the center of it all, a Malaysian financier named Low Taik Joe, known publicly as Joe Low, who allegedly orchestrated the theft in coordination with associates connected to Malaysia's own prime minister at the time, Najib Razak. Investigators in the United States, Switzerland, and Singapore all opened parallel investigations. Banks, including Goldman Sachs, which had helped structure 1MDB's bond offerings, eventually paid billions of dollars in fines and settlements for their role in enabling the fraud. Najib Razak was ultimately convicted in Malaysia and sentenced to prison. Joe Low was charged in absentia. He has never been located. Believed to be living under the protection of associates in China, he remains to this day one of the most wanted financial fugitives on Earth, a man who allegedly helped bankroll a movie about a con man while running one of the largest cons in modern history.
Theranos. Palo Alto, California. A 19-year-old Stanford dropout named Elizabeth Holmes founds a company with an extraordinary promise. A single drop of blood from a simple finger prick run through a proprietary device called the Edison, capable of running hundreds of medical diagnostic tests instantly, cheaply, without a single needle. It's a genuinely revolutionary idea. It's also, investigators would eventually prove, almost entirely fictional. Holmes builds Theranos into a $9 billion company on the strength of that pitch alone. She recruits an all-star board, former secretaries of state, retired generals, senior statesmen, most of whom had zero background in medical science or laboratory technology. She dresses exclusively in black turtlenecks, deliberately styling herself after Steve Jobs. She's put on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, Inc. magazine, hailed as the youngest self-made female billionaire in American history. Behind closed doors, the technology barely functioned. The Edison device was wildly inaccurate, and Theranos was quietly running most patient blood tests on modified, commercially available machines instead, while telling investors, regulators, and the public that their own proprietary technology was doing the work. Patients were making real, sometimes serious medical decisions off results that were flat out wrong. It takes a Wall Street Journal investigative reporter, John Kerry Rowe, working off tips from Theranos employees troubled by what they were witnessing internally to finally crack the story open in 2015. The company unravels rapidly. Federal regulators ban Holmes from operating a lab for 2 years. Major retail partnerships collapse. Theranos formally dissolves in 2018. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes is convicted on multiple counts of investor fraud. She's sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison, currently serving that sentence. The uncomfortable question the entire Theranos saga leaves behind: in an industry and a culture built on relentless hope and fake-it-till-you-make-it ambition, how long can a company built on a lie survive?
simply because nobody in the room wanted to be the one to ask if it actually worked.
6 stories, billions of dollars, millions of lives permanently altered. And if you look closely at every single one of them, the fake gold mines, the fabricated blood tests, the vanished executives, the trillion-dollar collapses, you notice they all share the exact same engine. It was never really about the money. It was about trust. And just how easily, how completely it can be weaponized by someone who understands exactly what you want to hear. If this kept you here for the full 30 minutes, subscribe. Because somewhere out there, right now, the next name on a list like this one is already building their empire.